and welcome to the Movie Scramble podcast. With me today is my ever reliable, well lit co host for the day, Mary. How are you doing?
Is that your way of saying I'm just really pink?
Nope. It's the difference between being well lit and having a bit of sunburn because the sun's been out for about 6 minutes in the west of Scotland.
That's it, and that is my sort of constitution. Anything over 10 degrees for more than 6 minutes and it becomes very, very problematic. So, yeah, very glad to be back chatting with you and excited to chat about this film today because I'm sure we'll have plenty to say.
Nice one. Mary has kind of hinted at what we're going to be doing. Today, we are going to be talking about the 2024 film Argylle. Argylle is a spy action comedy drama film, I suppose. There's all sorts of ways you can describe it. It's the latest film from director Matthew Vaughn, known for primarily the Kingsman films most recently. It was produced by Vaughn and various others, and the cast of the film is quite extraordinary. There's loads and loads of people in it. You've got the likes of Henry Cavill, Bryce Dallas Howard, Sam Rockwell, Bryan Cranston, Catherine O'Hara, Dua Lipa, John Cena, Samuel L. Jackson, and a few others beside. It is a film that came out of cinemas earlier on this year and is now on Apple TV Plus for your viewing pleasure. Now, it had a very short cinema run. It was reviewed. It's kind of a mixed thing, I think, in terms of reviews, because a lot of people were expecting a certain type of film, as I say, based on the fact that previous films were including all the sort of Kingsman movies. And I don't think it was as successful as the filmmakers would have liked it to have been. But Mary, given that wee rambling introduction, what were your initial thoughts and what were your expectations actually going into the film?
So actually, everything I had read about this film was really bad. So my expectations were nothing, basically, going in, because I'd heard, it was sort of bloated runtime, didn't make sense, all this sort of thing. Everything that I'd read was really, really negative. So watching it, I was kind of like, it seemed odd to me because I really loved the Kingsman films in particular, and it seemed a kind of similar vibe. So I thought, how bad can this be, really? I think people are sometimes a little bit quick to be harsh online and stuff like that. So went in, open mind. And I would say for the first 40 minutes, I was like, well, everyone that's reviewed this is an arsehole because I'm really enjoying this. This is great. It's really clever. I love the action. And then it all fell off a cliff. So I have really mixed thoughts about it. I feel like there is a film in there that's really good. It's just not the film that made the final cut.
All right, fair enough. I should say the premises of the film is there is a character called Ellie Conway who is an author. And the film opens. Now, I think it's probably okay to say this because it was kind of in the trailers and stuff. And
this is the entire trailer.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. She is a writer of spy novels featuring the character of Aubrey Argylle, who is played by Henry Cavill. Now, the film starts with a scene from one of her books being brought to life, and it's a pretty decent spy getting into a nightclub routine and working his way out of there. He's obviously there for a particular MacGuffin, and then there's all sorts of shenanigans and people getting killed and all sorts of things. Then there's a car chase and a motorbike chase, and it's all good fun. And then it turns out that she is actually narrating this whole tale, and it actually turns out that in real life, Ellie has written a series of books. I think she's written 4 with number 5 on the way, or in the Argylle series. And what has happened is her stories are uncannily similar to actual events that have been happening with the shady spy organization called, is it the Directorate or something like that? I can't remember. Yes. Yeah. And basically, they want to know what's going to happen next because it's basically the Argylle character himself is fighting against the Directorate and trying to bring them down. So there's all sorts of spy shenanigans going on, and she doesn't know who to trust and who to believe. And at the same time, the characters from her book are actually bleeding into her real life. She starts seeing Argyle in sort of real life situations as well. So that gives a wee bit of a flavour of what the film is actually about. Now, when it starts off, it is really, really cheesy. I liked the first bit of it because like
Me
anything
too.
anything that's sort of set in a nightclub, I really enjoy anyway because there's usually dancing, and we can talk about the dancing in the musical a wee bit. But it was a good start to it, and then when it went into the real life stuff and the likes of Sam Rockwell come into play, and I thought it held up reasonably well. Now, obviously, I've given you sort of a quick overview of the premise in that there's elements of what is real life and there's elements of this fiction fantasy life. How do you think that worked? Was the premise enough for the whole film? Now, I've got an idea about what you're going to say here, but I'll ask the question anyway.
Yeah.
Did the premise work?
Do you know what? I actually like some elements of it. So when we talked about American Fiction and we talked about him typing at his desk and how he brought the characters to life and they were right in front of him, I really liked that. So I actually really enjoyed there were scenes in this film where, you know, Sam Rockwell's character of Aidan was in a fist fight, but she was seeing Henry Cavill. And it was all this very sort of like, you know, Henry Cavill's got a wee sort of raised eyebrow, wee sort of wink to camera. It was very tongue-in-cheek. I loved it. I thought it worked really, really well. And there was lots of jokes about, you know, when Sam Rockwell bumps into Bryce Dallas Howard in the train, he's like, you know, the one thing that I think is wrong with your novels is that spies don't look like Henry Cavill. Basically, he's like too gorgeous. He would stick out. So I actually really liked that element of it. And I really enjoyed when, you know, Ellie's trying to picture what Argyle would do and you see that sort of come to life on screen. I actually really like those elements of it. There's other things in the film that really didn't work for me and that's what let it down. But actually this particular part of it, I really enjoyed. I thought it was very well executed, particularly in the fight sequences where you had Aidan and Argyle swapping in and out of place. And you could see how dangerous the real life stuff was versus how she imagined Argyle would deal with the situation. And as I say, it was very sort of almost like a Roger Moore type of Bond. It was super tongue-in-cheek. It was very, you know, winking to camera, all that sort of thing. And I did really enjoy that element of it.
Yeah, there were literally winks to cameras
at
various points in it.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to see the difference between them. They're obviously doing the same fighting and the same style, but when Aidan was doing it, it was more almost realistic because he was getting hit an awful lot more. It was more of a struggle for him, whereas their Argyle character was like, oh, have I got a fleck of something in my nose and all this sort of thing. So it was very well done in that way. I kind of thought that the premise has been done before, obviously, with things switching between sort of a book world and real world and all that. Not so much in the sort of action sense. It's you know, it's been sort of spanning across a couple of different genres. This technique, I thought it worked pretty well. I was engaged with it for most of it. There were bits where you kind of, you know, dipped and rose and all that, but I thought it wasn't too bad. Now, like you mentioned, it's a long film. It's 2.25 hours long. Do you think the pacing of it was consistent, or did it, like I say, up and down, or what? What do you think?
As I say, see the first 40 minutes, that was like a perfect Matthew Vaughn film for me. I really enjoyed it. Super fast paced, lots of hand-to-hand combat, really well executed. I think that from the kind of, I won't go too spoilery, but I would say that from the minute that Ellie and Aidan have to travel to France, I really struggled to stay tuned in. There was a lot of exposition via the dialogue, and there was also a lot of repeated dialogue. So it'd be things like, are you saying that, you know, so-and-so is a bad guy? Yes, I'm saying that so-and-so is a bad guy. I can't believe that. And it was just, it seemed such a waste. the premise of the film was so good, and so for it to completely fall off the cliff in the way that it did, and unfortunately at 2 hours and 20 minutes, it does start to feel very bloated because there's so much exposition, there's so much repetition, and the pacing, I would say, for about 2/3 of it is really off. And then I would say that the finale for me in particular just felt weird and really out of place, and just I didn't get it actually. And so what I thought was going to be a really interesting sort of character driven piece from Ellie and Aiden with this sort of fantasy element of the kind of super spy, it didn't work. It actually felt very turgid at some points, which I was surprised at, because usually Matthew Vaughn films are very much my cup of tea.
I think it could have shaved off about 25-30 minutes quite easily without affecting the story in any way. I know what you mean about some of the bloat of it, because basically, and this is obviously without going into any sort of spoilers, there were basically 2 finales to this film. There was 2 sort of big fight scenes, almost one after the other, and it was completely unnecessary to have both of them. It could have been combined into one scene quite easily. And there was one which was based around ice skating, and that went on far too long.
I thought that was shit. I'm really sorry.
No.
It was, the close-ups were weird. Don't get me wrong, I understand what they were doing. They were using the color palette, which obviously is quite prominent throughout the rest of the film. When I got that, but the rest of it, isn't that weird going, you're starting to clock watch going, this is going on for about 3 minutes. Oh, we're still going at about 7 minutes. And I don't ever want to feel like that when I'm watching a film, and I definitely felt like that watching this.
Yeah, in fact, if you think about it, there was actually 3 scenes rather than 2, because there was one before that which was very reminiscent of the first Kingsman film in terms of all the colours and the smoke and all the sort of stuff that they were using. And to have one of those and then a second one and then a third one after that, which were all slightly different, but there was a lot of similarities through them and a lot of repetition through them. It could have been cut down to one single scene, maybe lasting 5 minutes in total, and it could have taken in all of those elements without losing very much of the story, and it would actually made it a lot tighter. And yeah, I think it would have been a lot better because of it. Which, like I say, that is quite unusual, because the action scenes in previous Michael Vaughn films have been pretty good. They've been pretty decent. Although, having said that, Kingsman 2 was a bit bloated as well. Kingsman 3 or The Kingsman was a lot better.
Yeah, that was excellent. Really like that.
Yeah, but yeah, I can see what's actually happened here. They've had all these ideas and they didn't want to drop any of them because they were set in sort of different areas, and they're slightly different. One was gunplay, one was knife play, one was hand-to-hand. So they're thinking, well, it's 3 different things. Why drop any of them?
Which is insane, because to me it felt like they had almost no confidence in his filmmaking capabilities to end a story in a certain way. And I don't think that, don't get me wrong, as I say, at the hand-to-hand combat at the start of the film, and there's a scene in a sort of an abandoned flat as well, which I thought this was really well done, really nicely executed, if you'll pardon the pun, and felt authentic. Didn't feel like sort of cheap sort of, we're using smoke to disguise what's going on here because we don't have the budget for some proper fights. Whereas towards the end, I was sort of losing the will to live and sort of wishing it would hurry up, but also it just felt, as you say, it was like they had all these ideas, and instead of having a nice meeting where somebody sat down and went, do you know what, guys, we have to end the film in just one way and not 3. They just went, let's do all 3, and none of them worked. That's what I think the issue was as well. If one of them had sort of landed, you would feel like, okay, at least it sort of made up for it in the end. But I think the fact that none of them did was a big problem.
Yeah, you were sort of lulled into a false sense of security with the earlier fight scenes. Like I say, the one in the flat was really good because it was inventive the way they were doing that. And then they finished that particular scene and they had to escape, and they did that in a very good way as well, because it was going to be another action scene. It was a bit of fight in the corridor, and it happened, but the camera focused on Ellie for the whole thing because she was supposed to start stamping in the heads and she couldn't do it. And instead of seeing what Aidan was actually doing, it just sort of, the scene finished and there was all these bodies everywhere, which was a very nice way of doing it because then it's...
I thought it was funny.
Yeah, it was well done. And obviously that led up to part of the finale as well. The whole head stamping thing and all that was sort of revisited. There was quite a few elements, but you've got to expect that with these type of films, that they set things up in order for them to pay off later on. You know, it's like Chekhov's ice skate, you know, it's always going to pay off in the third act. So if you see somebody doing something like that, then it's always going to happen. Yeah, it could have been a hell of a lot shorter than it actually was. I was 100%. A wee bit disappointed in that because Matthew Vaughn's a really good filmmaker. So I don't really know what's going on. I think maybe somebody needed to have a bit of a word on this one, which was a shame. Like I say, there was a really good, tight film in there that wasn't sort of realised. Now, in terms of the performances, I've mentioned quite a number of the cast, and like there's two different elements. There's the Henry Cavill, John Cena relationship. Yeah,
getting that in for Simmy.
So there was, like I say, almost like two different films going on at various parts. How do you think the performances came across? Do you think they were good? And what do you think were the best of the performances, to put you on the spot here?
Do you know, interestingly, see, because we've just talked about the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, where I was hugely disappointed in Henry Cavill. This, I thought he was super charismatic. Now, obviously, as I say, it's very tongue-in-cheek, but these are, interestingly, two quite Bond-adjacent roles of his that we've talked about sort of back-to-back. This one, oh my God, you could absolutely believe he was the international super spy. You know, he had the green velvet blazer on. He was looking super chiseled. We'll talk about the toilet brush hair later. But I felt that he was really, really good. And actually, yeah, I mean, obviously, as Sam Rockwell's character points out, you know, super spies don't look like that. But as a sort of Hollywood ideal of what a spy looks like, I thought he was perfect. I will say that I particularly enjoyed Bryan Cranston and Catherine O'Hara absolutely chewing the scenery in all the right ways during this film, because I was looking forward to their performances and they didn't disappoint. But I would say Sam Rockwell's the standout for me pretty much in everything that he's in. But in this, I thought he was very good. I thought he was obviously very competent at his spy work. And actually, there were times where, as I'm sure we'll get into, you maybe weren't sure what his intentions were and who he was working for and all that sort of thing. And I thought he was absolutely brilliant, and I would watch him read the phone book, quite frankly. So yeah, he was the standout for me. I just think he's brilliant in everything. And actually, in a film that felt so bloated and so like, are we getting to the end, he was the redeeming factor for me.
Yeah, I think his character was particularly well written and allowed him to have comedic moments and obviously action and some serious moments as well. And he's that type of actor that he can just turn his hand to anything with sort of consummate ease. So yeah, you're right, he was the standout. But Henry Cavill, John Cena, their relationship was excellent, I thought. And it came across really well, obviously, because it wasn't meant to be totally real life. It was meant to be this written story about this. It's almost like a bromance between the two of them.
Yeah.
About how they actually interact and all that, and the way that they sort of work together and finished each other's sentences at times and things like just all these wee things. And I thought, yeah, that works really well. And you're totally right about Henry Cavill. He was completely engaged in this, up until the point where they did the music video, obviously, but he was completely engaged in the film. Do you want to mention? We might as well mention the music video here.
It's the best thing ever. There is a song that's played throughout the film. It's called Electric Energy, because Ariana DeBose has a very small role in this film, and obviously she's a singer, famous for Hamilton and West Side Story. So it's her song, Boy George. There is a music video that features the cast of Argylle, and if you need a laugh, I beg you to go and watch this video on YouTube, because everybody's giving it their all. You know, Sam Rockwell, Bryan Cranston, they're all there for a boogie. Henry Cavill is quite clearly, as John said, filling out some sort of contractual obligation that he's not quite certain about, because I've never seen somebody have such a bad time in a disco music video.
It is quite amazing to watch, and yeah, you do need to give it a view. He's so disengaged.
Yeah, this is not the charismatic Argyle.
No. His eyes are saying, "Save me."
100%. 100%. Oh, it's so funny.
So you touched on the music there. Music and dancing plays a relatively big part of this film. There is a disco soundtrack to parts of it as well. I think they use Sylvester's "You Make Me Feel Mighty Real" and the train sequence when they're the action sequence there, which I thought was particularly effective because, one, it's a great song, and two, it fitted in really well with the choreographics, I should say. What do you think? Do you think it was the right side of cheesy for the songs, or, did it work?
Definitely. I thought, honestly, that song on the train, I was like, what an absolute tune. And I really appreciate a film that will do something a bit different, because obviously you can have the dramatic Bond music, as somebody's getting their arse kicked and thrown off a train or whatever it is. But actually, I thought the disco element of it just made it so much more fun. And that's the thing, Matthew Vaughn films are really fun. There are moments of, seriousness and obviously some sort of heavy topics that are dealt with in this film, and sort of his other films as well. But actually the disco music I thought was a genius choice. Like, it was like, what was it, Monkey Man, when they had the fight to Boney M. I am all for films adding like really upbeat songs for somebody else to get their arse kicked to. I just think it works really, really well.
Mm-hmm. Also, there was the use of the Beatles song Now and Then.
That must have cost a fortune.
Well, apparently the song was in sort of final completed stages. It hadn't actually been released or anything, and it was offered to the film before it had actually got released. Because if you think about it, the song only came out maybe about a month or so before the film was released, and it's not just this. It's not just the song that's in the film. They've incorporated the song actually into the score as well, because it's featured a number of times, because this is Ellie's song. This is the one that she seems to listen to and react to, and it does play a key part in the later stages and during the very last fight sequence. It's involved there as well. So they actually got that song before it was actually ever released, and were able to work with it and introduce it. Yeah, so I think it's all got to do with the fact it's all sort of same companies and things like that that are involved in all these sort of things. But yeah, that was a bit of a scoop for them, I thought, considering it hadn't actually been released. And taking a chance, or I know it's a Beatles song and it's always going to be popular, but it might not have been any good. That's the thing, because it was like a wee offcut that they couldn't actually do anything with years and years ago, because they didn't have the technology to lift the vocals out of a cassette tape properly in the same way that they'd done with some previous tracks. This is what, how when they released the anthology albums, 3 of them, and they put on these extra tracks, which were based on recordings that John Lennon had made, and they added to them. This was a song that the quality of it was just so bad that they couldn't do anything with it, but they've used technology that was used for the Peter Jackson Beatles documentary, because it pulled a lot of information out from that and sort of reconstructed it so that it actually sounded fresh, and it didn't have like loads of hiss and background noise and all that. So it was all done that way. So it's really actually quite fascinating if you're interested in that sort of stuff, how they did it. But yeah, the fact that they were able to get that music was a bit of a scoop for them. I don't know how.
It's a huge win.
Yeah, I don't know how the record company are feeling once they actually saw the film. They were thinking,
"Oh, I know, actually, what have we done?"
Yeah. So, speaking of Matthew Vaughn, obviously he has had a bit of a checkered reputation in terms of his representation within films. Primarily the way that females are portrayed in his films, and sometimes a sort of misogynist view on life. I'm thinking particularly the first Kingsman film, the way that there was the whole, well, you can take me up the bum sort of stuff that was involved in all that, and the fact that of the main characters, and the main characters in the first Kingsman film as well, you're getting Eggsy doing all the action stuff, whereas the main female lead is basically hanging about in a balloon in the sky for most of it. So it's not particularly well represented. What do you think about this film in terms of that?
So I think it's, without going into too much spoiler territory, one, I appreciate any female character who's going to take off her heels to run, because that's how it would work in real life. So that is correct. So I did.
That was a Jurassic World reference.
Right, yes, So I appreciate that. I think, Bryce Dallas Howard, I think she brings a certain amount of gravity to anything that she portrays. And actually, obviously, the character of Ellie is supposed to be a writer. So she's not this, lean, mean killing machine. That's not what she's here to do. She's, as we said in the hallway scene, the camera focuses on her because she's not fighting, because it's just, as far as she's concerned, it's not what she's built for. And I like the fact that she did feel like a normal person. She was obviously a writer, which is quite engaging, always to see somebody do, whatever their process is. Obviously, as the film goes on, that changes, and actually how we view Ellie, like in terms of costume and everything, changes quite significantly as well, because she's a jeans and a jumper gal up until a certain point. But I would say that she's definitely one of his better written characters. I'm not sure that's a compliment necessarily in this film in particular, but I would say that she did feel like a fleshed out human being who was not just there to be eye candy, which is a definite step up. She wasn't also the butt of any sort of sexist jokes that I can remember off the top of my head. She seemed to be a sort of genuine, three-dimensional human, which I always appreciate. I think in this particular type of genre, and again, contrasting to what we've just watched, which was the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, where Isa Gonzalez's character was definitely just there to look pretty, even though she was shooting guns. This is definitely a step up.
No, you're right. The fact was that this whole film is based around the character of Ellie. So it would have been easy enough once all the action scenes started that the Sam Rockwell character of Aiden sort of took over the primary role, and that never happened. It was always from her perspective, which was always really good. And like I say, it highlighted the fact that she wasn't an action star. She wasn't built for that, like you so eloquently put it. She was more of a normal, relatable character. If somebody who writes as a relatable character, you know what I mean. They're more sort of relatable in terms of the type of person they are. They don't have a particular set of skills that they can use at any time. Her skills seem to be putting a cat into a backpack. So it's all relative, I suppose. I thought it was a bit of a departure, because most of the stuff that seems to have been done before is, well, the Kingsman stuff's all sort of boys' own adventure stuff, sort of ramped up, a lot more violence and all that sort of stuff. So this did have elements of that, but it came from a different source, a different place this time, which I thought was, it's pretty decent. I thought, it seemed to work a bit better.
Yeah, it's also interesting because some of the stuff that I've read online, so obviously, as you know, there's been the whole thing about, female-led Marvel films and stuff like that. And I did read some sort of discussions online where people were saying, do people only hate this film because it's, female-centric or whatever? And actually, that's definitely not what and especially as a woman watching that's definitely not what my problem is with this film. I actually really enjoyed her character. It just, and I'm sure we'll go on to this, the plot, etc., just didn't work for me in the way that I hoped it would.
So when you say the plot didn't work for you, what do you actually mean by that?
So I think it got to a point where there were so many plot twists as to sort of, so-and-so's actually a bad guy or so-and-so's actually a good guy, that it just became silly. So it wasn't difficult to follow in the sense that it was over-explained to you who was doing what at any given time, but it just became ridiculous. And I think that's, don't get me wrong, spy films are obviously by their very nature sort of far-fetched because we don't live in that world, but it just didn't work on a comedy level, it didn't work on a drama level, it didn't work on a sort of spy thriller level. It just was very, very silly, and I think that that's probably not the vibe they were going for. And when they were writing this, they probably thought it was clever and would keep people guessing right up into the end, but actually some of the stuff you could see coming a mile off, which is a bit disappointing as well. So that for me just became, it was just like, just get to the point. That I think that's what I had the issue with. There were so many here's a surprise and here's a plot twist, or what they thought was plot twists, but actually it was so transparent as to what was going to happen. It just didn't deliver.
Yeah, no, you're right. And it all sort of circles back to the runtime. It seems all that did was it extended the runtime of the film and made it a bit more bloated. Yeah, there was periods where they were just saying things just to remind the audience of something that had previously happened, and that didn't particularly work very well. What do you think in terms of... Sorry, on you go. Sorry.
What I was going to say is just have faith in your audience that something you told them 45 minutes ago, they're still going to remember.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at with this.
What do you think of the mix between the supposed real life stuff and the book stuff? Was that proportionate? Was there enough of both of them, or do you think there was too much of one or the other?
Actually, I would say there was not enough of the book stuff. And I get that the whole point of this film is that Argyle is a fictional character, but there are sort of moments where Ellie, stops seeing Argyle just in the fight sequences and she starts to see him in the more sort of quiet moments where she's like in her hotel room or whatever it is. But I actually didn't feel there was enough, especially because it did seem like Henry Cavill and John Cena were having a really good time. Their sort of chemistry was there. Their action sequences were really good fun. It was obviously, sort of hyperbolic in its depictions of this kind of spy world that she'd created. So I would argue that there actually wasn't enough of that. I'm not by any means saying extend. I don't want a director's cut with an extended runtime or anything like that. But I felt that because, as I say, the real life stuff was so exposition-y and sort of, as I say, repeated dialogue, that we could have done with a little bit more fun. And that's definitely what the fictional Argyle brought to this was a lot more fun.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What do you think of the fact that there is actually an Argyle novel out there?
Yeah, so this came out after the film, I believe.
This came out before. No, this came out before the film. The book came out in January, and I don't think the film came out until February. So the book was out there for about a month beforehand.
Right, okay. So I thought they'd sort of landed roughly at the same time with the book coming maybe a week or two after, because was there not rumours that Taylor Swift had written the book as well at one point?
Mm-hmm.
I can see why they've done it. It's a bit of a merch grab, if you ask me, because I don't think it's not one of these films that merits a follow-up book. But as far as I understand, Matthew Vaughn was trying to create a sort of Argyle, Kingsman, whatever else universe. And maybe the book, obviously, which has more time and more text and more pages and all the rest of it, maybe that was going to drop hints about, the sort of extended universe, as it were. It feels like a bit of a cash grab, though, if you ask me.
Yeah, obviously it ties in with the film in a certain way, because there is a mid-credit scene where there is an indication that, like you say, the Kingsman universe and the Argyle universe may be linked in some way. I won't spoil the actual context or content of the credit scene, but it does link it in a certain way, and it kind of looks as if it's making out that there's a way forward for this franchise without it actually being a franchise that involves the character of Ellie Conway, and that kind of feeds back into the book idea as well. If you've got a book, then you can do a film of a book. So everything would be fictional within that book. So that might be a way that they pursue that, and possibly Mr. Cavill coming back as well.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. As I say, I would like to have seen more of him in Argyle, but do I need more of this film? No. They feel like two very different things, I guess. And I guess what you're saying is you could have the sort of fictionalized world where it's just his character, which it would be interesting, but I don't know that I'd be interested enough to sort of rush out and see it, given how much this has kind of put me off. Because actually, because I did enjoy the Kingsman films as well, I almost don't want them tarnished by association and being dragged into this extended universe that nobody needs and nobody asked for.
Yeah, I can see a way that they could link them, but then you've got to ask yourselves, how many secret organisations are there out there in the world? fucking dozens of them by this point. Even within the Kingsman universe, there's at least two good ones of good guys, and probably another couple of like the Golden Circle, for instance, all that sort of stuff. Is there's all these bad guys. So there's all these organizations out there. So if you're going to add other ones in there, maybe they're called by different names in different places, and it's just the same organization. You never know.
Maybe.
That's one way to do it, I suppose. So you wouldn't be up for watching more of it then, based on what you saw in the first film?
No, and do you know what? I was really, when I saw the first posters and it had the cat, the Scottish fold cat, which is just gorgeous, I was really excited, and I thought, Matthew Vaughn's Spy Thriller, this is excellent, this is right up my street. And as I say, when I watched the first bit of it, I was like, this is so good, and then I just stopped caring. And I think that's really problematic for a film when you have an engaged and wanting to be engaged viewer who then just gives up on your film because it's so repetitive and it's so just so many elements of it just didn't work. And so I definitely wouldn't rush out to see any sort of sequel to this or extended universe or anything like that, despite the fact that there were elements of it that I did have fun with. The sort of the bad outweighed the good for me, I'm afraid.
Mm-hmm. So how much in terms of core exercises do you think you need to do before you can do the Whirlybird? I would expect it would be quite a lot. If you're at the bottom of the Whirlybird, you're going to have a decent core about you, aren't you?
I mean, first of all, I assume Henry Cavill's quite tall, right? So to actually jump up onto his shoulders is no small feat in itself. And then to do the splits across said shoulders, I mean, hats off to both Bryce Dallas Howard and Dua Lipa, because that genuinely, I was like, wow, that is impressive levels of flexibility. And as you say, the core strength was actually better than Henry Cavill's.
Yeah. I quite like that. That was a nice touch, because usually there's some sort of dance sequence. It's like if there's anything set in a nightclub, you're usually getting the spy dancing with somebody, but to do something as ridiculous as that was quite impressive. And then
because usually spy sequences are like quite sexy and they're all sort of like moodlet and all this, whereas this was just like legs akimbo, flinging yourself around the dance floor.
Yeah, it was good fun. I really liked it. The fact was they did that and there was nobody else on the dance floor. It was just the two of them at the start of the film. But then when they'd caught up with that woman and she was talking about how she'd been tipped off, and she went into the dance floor and everybody was there. There was about 7 or 8 couples.
It was quite ridiculous. That level of ridiculous I can fully get behind, because that's at least funny.
Yeah. Do you think, Celia, you mentioned in terms of the sort of the colour palette and the sort of visuals and everything, do you think there was differences between the two elements, or do you think it was pretty similar all the way through?
So I wouldn't say that the real life and the fantasy stuff had any sort of particular difference to it. The opening sequence is obviously super glossy, in that sort of gold kind of nightclub with the moonlight, and then they obviously go out into Greece, which is obviously sort of your traditional sort of white and blue topped houses. Now obviously sort of playing around with primary colours a lot here. The red, yellow and blue crops up really frequently. It's on all the posters, it's on the little sort of diamond print everywhere. I don't think I quite got what it was meant to stand for, other than just quite a nice bold choice in terms of colour grading and the sort of colour palette in general. But I wouldn't say that the more the film goes on, certainly the distinction between fact and fiction becomes less and less as we're sort of drawn into Ellie's world. I would say the opening sequence, as I say, feels super glossy, really, really sort of Bond-esque. But they obviously bring those sort of colour elements into the real world later on in the film. As I say, I don't think I got what it was meant to stand for, but I didn't. Visually, it did give some quite interesting scenes, I would say.
I think you're right. I think it was there just to differentiate it between the two. And then by the end sequence, it just all looked the same anyway. It was just incorporated all sorts of things into it and made it look the same. So it's a sort of merging of two worlds. So I think you're totally right with that, yes. Sam Rockwell, definitely MVP for this
100%.
film. Now, there's obviously some minor characters in there, like Samuel L. Jackson played a relatively minor role where he basically just sat behind a desk for most of the time. it just seemed to be that they were just filling these small roles with recognisable people, just because it's almost part of his troupe. He uses the same actors, like Samuel L. Jackson's appeared in a couple of films that he's done, and but it's almost seemed to be a wee bit of a waste to have somebody like him and not use him in a way. And there was a few. I mean, Richard E. Grant, for instance, was in at the very start.
Oh yeah, it's a total blink and you'll miss it type of thing.
Now, again, that was part of the fictional world, so would that be something that he'll come back to if they do an Argyle movie, because that sort of fits in with the world? But it just seemed to be these wee cameo roles were a wee bit wasted, I felt. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Samuel L. Jackson scenes in particular is where I really started to struggle with this film. His dialogue was just really, really poor, as I say, exposition, or just going over plot point after plot point after plot point. And it just seems such a waste. As you say, he's sitting behind a desk the entire time. There's absolutely you don't even see him get up out his chair. It's just, it felt like a real waste. And especially with, Richard E. Grant obviously was playing the director, so he was obviously meant to be another sort of scene chewing baddie, and we didn't actually get to see the sort of full effect of that as well. But yeah. And even Ariana DeBose, I mean, she's not in it for that much as well, and that also seemed like a bit of a wasted opportunity to have another sort of well-written female character in there, so she's, really get about 5 minutes of screen time if you're lucky. So yeah, it did. And as I say, the Samuel L. Jackson stuff in particular I struggle with, because it's where I started to really lose interest in the film.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think you're right there. So was there anything else that you would want to highlight from this film? I know we've talked about a number of different things, but is there anything I've missed?
I would just like to say that I find it absolutely hilarious that Alfie the cat in the film is played by Claudia Schiffer's cat in real life, because obviously she's married to Matthew Vaughn, and the cat is actually called Chip. And he was probably the character towards the end that I was most concerned about their safety, because I was like, is anything happening with the cat? Is everyone okay? Is the cat okay? So I thought he was very, very cute and adorable. And if I had a cat like that, I would also carry it around in a backpack.
There was a few comedic scenes with the cat as well, which I thought was quite good. Yeah. They made full use of cat expressions as well. Yeah, so that did work very well. You never know; he might get a spin-off of his own. Anything's possible.
That I actually probably would go and see. As we said at the start, when we were talking about the stuff that we've been watching, my tolerance for shite is fairly high, so I probably would go and see an Alfie the Cat spin-off.
So we've talked reasonably extensively about the film without going into any sort of spoilers or anything, but there is one thing we have not covered in any great depth, which leads us into our next conversation. The character of Argyle has a god-awful haircut. It's the only way to put it. It's this spiky, overgrown flat top is probably the best way to describe it. It's a flat top that's about 3 inches too long, and it sits up uniformly at the top of his head for some unknown reason. It is the kind of thing of fiction, because no one could maintain hair like that in real life doing the things that he was doing. Now, it's for me, it was a choice because it makes him stand out, and it's completely divorced from real life, because no one in real life would look like that, because he was wearing it was almost like purple velvet jackets and things like that as well. So it just accented the fact that he was completely standing out from the crowd, which spies never do. Obviously, they're not supposed to. Do you think that was... Obviously, it's a talking point because we're talking about it. You think it was done in that way to make it a talking point and get people talking about the film before they actually saw it?
100%. I think it is crimes against Henry Cavill. I think that's what's happened. I think, in fairness, when you have someone, let's be honest, is, carved by the gods from marble, as, Henry Cavill is, I think that was a way to sort of, as you say, make him sort of stand out. Now, when you think of your Bond characters, or even, Jason Bourne has a really normal haircut, your bonds are all sort of slick and smooth and the hair
Yeah.
sort of perfectly coiffured, but it's not ridiculous. This was almost like, it was like she'd watched too many like 80s movies or something, and that was the haircut she had trapped in her head, and therefore that's what he looked like. But I think you're right. I think it was to divorce him from reality completely. It was, as I've said, make him look like a toilet brush. That seemed to be the solution.
So leading on from that, we thought we would have a quick chat about god-awful haircuts in movies. Now, we're not going to do our traditional top 3 or anything here. We'll just have a chat about our various lists, of which I am sure that they're all extensive, because see, once you start looking at these things...
I know, that you fall in a rabbit hole, don't you?
Yeah. Now, the way I approached this was I ignored ones that were normal for the time. So obviously the 80s. So for instance, like Melanie Griffiths in Working Girl.
Yeah.
Not a particularly good hairdo, but it was prevalent at the time. A lot of people looked like that. They had these perms and everything. So I went down a completely different route to that, just ones that stood out for all time, and you would never see anything like that outside of a Slade video from 1974 or something like that. Yeah. So what was your criteria for choosing?
So exactly the same. If it was, of its era. So I was looking at Jean-Claude Van Damme films for some mullet inspiration. But I thought, actually, that's not fair, because that was of the time. That's what all your action stars were sporting. So I went down the sort of either bad wig route, not as in like the wig was poor, but it just looked so ridiculous on the person, or just a really, really dodgy haircut that this poor actor had to live with for a certain period of time while they were shooting.
Yeah. The obvious one to start with in that sort of respect is Javier Bardem in No Country for Old Men, because he actually got his hair cut like that.
I know!
It wasn't a wig. And he said to the Coen brothers, "You realise I'm not going to get laid for 3 months now. No one will look at me because of that." Now, it's an individualistic...
I feel like that's not true.
Yeah. Could wear a hat, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's probably a good one to start with, because that defined the character as being an oddball. And I think that's why it's done in some ways, because it shows that the character is sort of outside their normal conventions. They're not really bound by the fact that they need to blend in, or they're trying to be a certain type of person. Like you say, with people with mullets during the 80s, then there was loads of people like that. It was fairly normal, but there wasn't really anybody that looked like the Anton Chigurh character. Yeah, there was nothing like that at all.
No, and I think I remember watching him on Graham Norton, and he said that like in between takes, in order to keep it sitting perfectly, he had to wear hairnets.
Yeah.
So quite honestly, the thought of him with that really terrible haircut and a hairnet on top is probably enough to make sure that nobody looked at him for 3 months. But again, I think you're right. I think it marked the character out as someone who was different, and anyone who's willing to walk around with that haircut is quite clearly a psychopath, and therefore it just blended in with everything else that he was doing. So it's one of the big sort of standout, really obvious, like it's such a terrible, terrible hair design, but it's so perfect for, as you say, communicating who the character really is, that it just works.
So what ones stood out to you?
So this one actually I'd forgotten about until Chris mentioned it yesterday. But do you remember Joel Edgerton in Smoking Aces?
Yes. Wow.
So it's like almost a bowl cut on top, but then shaved, and then the bit at the back. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, that is one of the worst haircuts. Imagine actually having to sit in a chair in hair and makeup. You're preparing yourself for this role. And they're like, right, so what we're going to do is we're just going to, take the scissors and snip bluntly across here, but then shave the bottom. Is that okay? And now, obviously, again, so Smoking Aces is quite a sort of stylized film and stuff like that. So within the realms of the film, it makes sense. But when you look at it on its own, it's hideous. It's one of the worst haircuts I've ever seen in my life.
That's a pretty good one, actually. Yeah, not too bad at all. I was having a look at various pictures and stuff, and one that really stood out for me was Chris Tucker in The Fifth Element. I don't know if you've seen this.
Of course, yeah.
Blonde wig, and it looks as if he's got a loofah attached to the front of his head. It's just completely weird. And I know you're thinking sci-fi and futuristic, and there's a few dodgy ones in there. I think Gary
Well,
Oldman
definitely, yeah.
is just crazy because he's got the whole side parting and it's all shaved, and he's got bits of
Yeah,
plastic
yeah.
and stuff as well. But the Chris Tucker one for me completely stood out. I just thought how did somebody come up with that idea? Thinking, yeah, we'll just have this, we'll just cover this toilet roll in yellow stuff and just bonk it on. There we go. Yeah.
Oh yeah, do you know it's one of the ones that did it popped up a few times when I was looking them up. Yeah, when I was looking up hairstyles and stuff yesterday. And you're right, it's one of those. Every time you see it, I'm like, oh, I need a new loofah. That's exactly what my head goes to because it is. It's just this big like horn, almost like sticking off the front of his head. It's yeah, you do wonder. See, as an actor, obviously, like costume and hair and makeup helps you get into character. What does that add? What does that
Yeah.
particular hairstyle add?
I think it's to do with the craziness and the outlandishness of the character because he was a TV presenter and it wasn't. He was a commentator because he was always he was a broadcaster, I think. But yes, it was all to do with that, the showmanship. And I suppose there's sort of similar ones in the likes of the Hunger Games. Stanley Tucci character.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Crazy wigs and all this sort of stuff. So what else were you thinking of?
So for Crimes Against Beautiful People, I'm going to go with Tom Hardy's terrible wig in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. That almost sort of Barbara Windsor-esque blonde thing that they gave him to wear, that he's got the kind of curl coming down the front and the sides and it's heavy on top, but there's kind of sideburns going on. And again, I get that it was sort of kind of the time, but I felt like everybody else had relatively normal hair or better wigs in that film. He definitely pissed someone off the makeup trailer that day.
Yeah. Also, now I couldn't choose one particular one, but anybody that was sort of in the main cast of American Hustle. That was just
Bradley
wig
Cooper's
central.
Jerry Curl.
Oh yeah, just unbelievable. There was no need for them to be like that. You know, I know it was of the period and everything, but that was completely out with sort of normal societal norms there. It just but for one of the biggest crimes against humanity, it has to be Sean Penn's do in Carlito's Way, where he looks like it's almost like a balding Art Garfunkel with a wee bit more curly hair on top.
Yes. I know exactly what you mean. Oh my God, yes, that is terrible. That is terrible hair.
I don't know if that was actually based on what the character looked like in real life. I didn't investigate it that much, but you've got to think, really, did they get? Yeah.
That is really bad. Another one that I thought of as well is Courtney Cox in Scream 3, that fringe. It was like a 3-year-old had cut in a fringe.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I can't remember what the reason was for that again. I don't know if it was I can't remember if it was a wig or whatever, or something had gone wrong, but she had these distracting, little bits of hair that were like, almost looked like, what's her face in Beetlejuice? Winona Ryder. Yeah. It was that sort of short, spiky thing. And it's so distracting that you'll not look at anything for anything else in the entire film. It's just her fringe.
That can be a real problem, can't it? When you've got something like that sort of stands out, because it completely pulls you out of the film, and you're not concentrating on. Well, I suppose with Scream, you don't really need to concentrate on the dialogue or the exposition. You kind of know where it's going to go anyway. It's going to turn out to be somebody you didn't think of.
Yeah.
It's actually a knife-wielding maniac. So yes, I was interested in the way that Star Wars approached here as well, because there's a few. Obviously, Carrie Fisher had the Chelsea buns in the side of her head, but that wasn't the worst of it. It was when they were doing the prequels and Natalie Portman, her character, and they thought, we'll pay homage. We'll pay homage to Carrie Fisher here, but we'll make it bigger. And his side of her head, and it just looks terrible.
Oh, it's so bad. It's like, do you know how when bakeries compete to make like the biggest cake? That is like they've just stuck it on. And the thing is, it looks so uncomfortable and so weighty, like because you've got the front bit, which is like scraped back. So that looks like it's pulling her forehead back. Then you've got these enormous, like oversized donuts at the side of her head. It actually looks uncomfortable. And I think that's the thing as well. Sometimes I think when you're looking at people's sort of hair design or costume design, you're like, how do you walk around in that? Because that just looks so awkward. And that's one of those ones that kind of pulls you out of it because you are going, that must just be a nightmare. How do you fit through a door?
Yep. The last one for me, I could speak about this all day, obviously, because there's so many of them out there, is Colin Farrell in Alexander, where he's got this blonde...
Oh, I thought you were going to say a different film, but
No,
yes.
no. I know the other one you're meaning, but this blonde, fluffy hairdo that he described as his Doris Day look, and it just looks awful.
Did he?
Yes.
That is brilliant. That is absolutely... It's shocking that I distinctly remember that say. I actually thought you were going to say the Horrible Bosses one where he's got the 3-strand.
No, but yeah, that is pretty bad, yeah.
I know we've talked about Julie Andrews and Topaz, but that to me, no, sorry, not Topaz, Torn Curtain, but that to me obviously is she also pissed somebody off in the hair and makeup department. The only other one that I could think of was Jodie Foster in The Accused.
Mm-hmm.
That's Cavill-esque because that goes up. That's a good 3 inches above her head as well. And I would say an honourable shout out because it's not film to Elizabeth Moss in the early seasons of Mad Men, who also had the world's most terrible fringe playing Peggy.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot about that. Yes.
And I get that they were trying to make her look like this sort of like, you know, small town homespun sort of good Catholic girl, but even for the 60s, people would have laughed at that hairstyle. It was terrible.
Yeah, suppose we've discussed it before, obviously, when we did our Love Lies Bleeding pod, but there's a couple of dodgy do's in that.
How could we forget?
I know. But obviously, I wasn't going to highlight it as a main one because I think we have
discussed Ed Harris's hair extensions at length. Yes,
we have dipped into that well. Yes. So that is us for today. We have had a reasonably long chat about Argylle, and strangely enough, our tangent went off into hairdos this week. So that's something a bit different for us. If you would like to get in touch with us, you can get us on all the usual social media channels. You know who we are by now. You can get us on email at podcast@moviescramble.co.uk. We are always interested to hear what you have to say. If you would like to post a review of us, that would be very helpful indeed. It gets the word out there and gets us a wee bit higher up the rankings in terms of the search engines for the hundreds of thousands of podcasts that seem to be out there these days. It would be very appreciated if you could do something like that. So that is it for today. We shall be returning. We have a number of pods that we are looking to do over the next couple of weeks. There's always something that we can watch, whether it's something new or something old. So from myself, thank you very much, and so see you later. Bye.
Bye.